Morning, everyone. First of all, thanks for waking up so early for my keynote. So, why am I going to tell you something about open source and why it's not just about the source code? First of all, I'm a software engineer by heart. Since a couple of weeks, right now, I'm a open source strategist at Europace. I'm also a member of the Apache Software Foundation, co-founder of Apache Mahute. Raise your arm if you've heard about Mahute by any chance. Oh my gosh, that's quite a few more than I expected. And I'm co-founder of Berlin Buzzwords. So if you need an excuse to go to your employer and have some pay-for-it ticket to Berlin in June, hint, hint, Berlin in June is really, really nice and warm and sunny. And if you're interested in big data stuff or search, then you should check out the website. Now you know a little bit about myself. I would like to know a little bit about you as well. How many of you are running their own open source projects? GitHub projects count. A couple, okay. How many of you have contributed to any open source projects? Keep your hands up if this is Scala. Okay, good. How many of you wrote about an open source project, say blog posts, press articles, tweets? No Twitter users? Seriously? How many of you have helped people? Okay, good. So why should you care about what open source is about other than source code? After all, we are software engineers, we take the library, we put it in our project, and everything works, and everything's fine, right? Okay, let me tell you a story. I put my mom onto Ubuntu when they had their first UI. I was very frustrated to learn that when they rolled out Unity, the whole user experience changed completely. So if you teach other people to use a project, you probably want to be in the loop of what their plans with respect to new releases are, so that you have like a warning time to train your users to do something else. Of course, if you're betting your business on an open source project, you want to know how this project is governed. You want to know what the likelihood is of this project falling on the floor if the main contributor or maintainer loses interest in this project. If you're betting your business on this project, you probably also want to know what their approach to fixing security issues looks like. Is it very likely that security issues are being leaked out before they are fixed? Or is it more likely that they are fixed before they are published? And speaking of fixing those issues, what is the time it takes for this project to react to security advisories? Last but not least, if you're running your own open source project and you want it to become a little bit more successful than just being a code drop somewhere, you will want to know about things like how do I get people into my project? How do I deal with people who are stealing time from the project without adding value? You probably want to know about how to manage tasks and issues, etc. Plus, you probably want to know about how to protect your downstream users from legal threats. Okay, let me start. When you're building an open source project, what you want to do is to first sit down and think about what your goal is. Do you want to do this just to build your CV or your reputation? Another goal could be to go out and break into an existing market by providing source code that otherwise would be patent proprietary under a free software license. Or you could go the middle path where you want to collaborate with a lot of other people to build something that's bigger than anything that you could have built on your own. Depending on the answer to these questions, the stuff that you want to do, in addition to just coding, will be slightly different. One question that will arise fairly early is whether you want to be a benevolent dictator for life, So that is whether you want total control over the future of your project, whether you want to be able to dictate project direction, and whether you want to build your company and bet your company on top of this project. Because most likely, if this is your core value, you want to be able to drive the direction without distraction. However, if you decide to go for a dictatorship like that, the question that arises is, what happens if the dictator goes away? What happens if this one single person loses interest? What happens if this company is being acquired and business moves into a completely different direction? Another approach that projects at the Apache Software Foundation take is to have a more collaborative environment where equal peers are working towards a common goal and where decisions are made in a consensus-based way. The disadvantage of this is that oftentimes it leads to slower decisions because first you have to get everyone on board, or you have to get a majority at least on board. The advantage is that the project survives people leaving. For full disclaimer, I asked people before whether they know about Apache Mahute. I have to admit that for the past 3 years, I didn't have a lot of time to spend on this project. There's a tiny little girl sitting over there. I do have a day job. I started doing a conference a couple years ago. All of this cut away on my time for Apache Mahute. Nevertheless, they put out a successful release months after months, and they put the project on a completely different path than when I left. So it continued to survive, it continued to live. Okay, when thinking about projects, what kind of topics do you have to think about? Let's start with the easy ones. Copyright, patent law, trademarks. Patent law is sort of relevant in Europe. It's pretty relevant in the US at least. Let's start with copyright. Let's imagine you want to build something and you want to give those 4 freedoms of use, study, share, improve, not only to your downstream users, but to everyone using software that is derived from your project. Obvious choice, you go for copyleft. If you have a library that people want to link to, it's probably more obvious to go for something like LGPL. If you go for server software and you want to guarantee the same freedoms, you probably want to go for AGPL. GPLs simply for everything else. Okay, now I'm up here and my project is licensed under the Apache software license. Why didn't I go to this site? If all you want to do is to ensure that your direct downstream users have the 4 freedoms of use, study, share, improve, you probably want to go for a non-copyleft license. If it's small enough so you don't care, just put it in public domain. If it's like a shell script that you wrote or some tiny little tooling, just put it out there. If it's libraries that implement the standards that you want to push for, it makes sense to use something that doesn't have a copyleft license, so it's being adopted by as many people as you can reach. Same is true for projects that want to change existing economics, or if your goal is to have a very big community where also corporate users have no trouble with using this project. And the last point is why I went and chose the Apache Software Foundation, the Apache license for Apache Mahute. The goal was to build a project that would have the widest use cases possible, including corporate use cases. You probably want to think about and read up on patent law. I'm not going to go down there. For me, that's just dragging territory. There's people at the FSFE who can educate you, people at the FFII, and other institutions. You probably also want to think about trademark law. Again, something boring, dusty, something. Why do you want to think about this? Well, you don't want to infringe patent names when you choose your project name. You don't want to spend months and years development time only to be sued afterwards by a company that owns the trademark of your project. What's even worse is you don't want to have another project come up to you and tell you, hey, this was our trademark to begin with. That's just embarrassing. There's a little anecdote. You probably have heard about Apache Hadoop. It's been founded by Doug Cutting. Doug Cutting once told us that kids are very good at coming up with non-trademark name. So Hadoop actually is the name of a little toy elephant. There's also a search engine that Doug Cutting wrote, which is called Nudge. Nudge was the first sort of words that one of his children invented. So if you do have children, maybe make notes to find non-trademark names. Okay, now you've got a non-infringing name. What's next? You will have to decide which uses of your name you approve. For instance, up here, do you want people to be able to sell copies of your software via eBay under that name? Maybe even including malware, including viruses, whatever. There's a little anecdote about Genome. Logo down here, original logo. There's a little company which is taking care of feet. That's a fish pedicure company that used pretty much the same logo except that there is a fish. So the Genome people were faced with a decision, is this infringing or is this not infringing? Apparently it's not. There's the question of whether or not you want to register your trademark name. Registering does cost money. It costs money in each country where you do this registration. It makes enforcing your trademark just easier. So what's the process of keeping your trademark current? You find projects or you find usages of your project name. You then have to go through a process where you identify whether this usage is infringing or not, and then you have to actively fight infringement. Okay, let's go through these steps. Finding these usages. You probably want to set up something very bare bones, at least some kind of Google alert for your project name. Actually, this is something that you will want to do for your project anyway, because you want to know who's using it, who's writing about it, just as a, yeah, you have done something nice. So this is like a byproduct. Identifying what's infringing is a bit more tricky, because you then have to reach out to your community and decide which way to go. Actively fight infringement. It sounds like going to a lawyer and going to court. Quite honestly, often it's just typing up an email, hey, such and such, this is our open source project, what you're doing is not allowed. And typically people will react, and typically you will find a solution that doesn't involve going to lawyers. Okay, so much for the easy part. Let's go for the trickier part, which is people. How many of you still believe in the lone hacker lie? There's a lone hacker which does a very successful project and which conquers the world. Okay, so we all know that software doesn't evolve from one bright mind alone. Successful projects tend to have a diverse and very large community. Or translated, in my opinion, a project without people is a dead project. Translated to Apache speak, community over code. Translated to ZeroMQ speak, people before code. You probably have similar sentences for many large open source projects. So what people aspects am I talking about? I'm talking about, at first, about users. Where do you find them? How do you find users? There's a term for that, actually. It's very well known to probably everyone in this room. It's called marketing. What does marketing look like? Well, familiar. You go to Twitter, you create a Twitter account for your project, you create a hashtag for your project, you create tweets about your project, you create a search for your project name in order to figure out which people are using your project, what people are doing with your project, what they are saying about you. Just a little anecdote from Apache Mahute. It's very, very unlikely that people came up to me and told me what they are doing with the project. Oftentimes, I got involved in conversations on Twitter where people were sharing slide decks, where people were searching for people that had those skills for a new job, and then get into the conversation in order to find out what they were doing with the project, which use cases they found useful. People very seldom were self-identifying. The next step then was to talk to them whether it would be okay to identify what they were doing on a public web page. We always had a web page, a wiki page actually, which was called Powered by Mahute, where we were tracking those use cases. Why would we do something like that? Well, first of all, it's nice for yourself if you've written this software to know about it. However, it's also nice if you want to do a press release about your project to be able to cite company X, Y, and Z are using your project. As another anecdote, I once went to ApacheCon in Amsterdam, and we had a couple of Lucene and Zola talks there. I think it must have been in 2008 or 2009. There were presentations by the core developers, by the founders. But the one presentation that was most interesting to people there was by downstream users of the project. They were giving praise for the project, like third-party praise that wasn't coming from within the project. And this was very helpful. What other aspects are we talking about? Is there anyone in the room who still remembers this slide? 1, 2, 3. This was how I first heard about the Scala language. It was back in 2009. It was as always, rainy weekend in Brussels, free university, someone on stage explaining something about a scalable language. It was called FOSDEM. So if you start your own project, what you probably want to do is to go to other open source conferences, is to go to other corporate conferences and talk about what you are doing. The goal there is to find users and to find users which later on you can convert into contributors. Next step, of course, you go for your own conference, like we have here today, several years later. Something else you can do for marketing, you can talk to the press directly. That's something I've done years ago. I've contacted both Heise and Software Support Media in Germany, which are like large IT publishers there. And they were very happy to work together with me. So with every release of the project, we would write a press release ahead of time, send this release to the editors. They would come up with an article, schedule it for our release date, so that we had decent press coverage on the day of the release. So this is not something that happens at random, and this is not something that happens magically or automatically, but is typically driven by the project itself. What else can you do? You can write books if you've got the time for it. I only got so far as reviewing books, and this already took quite a toll. And you can publish, of course, your documentation in printed form. With documentation, we are at the second bubble, which is called training. So if you've got human beings which are interested in your project and who want to use it, there are people who are happy learning about how to use the software just from reading documentation. But most of the people that I talk to, they are happy to get a brief explanation. So what will you do? You will give talks at conferences. You will probably spend time in the hallway track of conferences, exchanging ideas. And just, again, a little anecdote. I gave a course on machine learning and open source at Technical University Berlin a couple of years ago. At some point, I was too lazy to prepare the slides, so that I told my students, hey, here are the tickets for Berlin Buzzwords, come to us. What you have to do in turn is to interview our speakers. So students were interviewing everyone, except that one keynote speaker, which was extremely relevant to their course. The speaker was about big data and machine learning. Why didn't they interview this guy? They were just too shy. They didn't approach him. I told the speaker, it was Ted Dunning. He was like, what? They were too shy? Okay, I'll take a train ticket, go to this course and talk to these people. And turns out you don't have to be shy to talk to those people here on stage. They are usually very happy to answer questions. Also, you will go to conferences and have a booth where you introduce your project or where you introduce the topics that you're interested in. So it's something that the Apache Software Foundation learned a couple of years ago to do at FOSDEM. There's a ASF booth at FOSDEM where you can get stickers and other swag, but where you can also learn about the foundation. So what they learn there, go to where your users are and start the conversation there. Speaking about going to where your users are, once you've taught your users how to use the software, they will have questions. Answering questions, what does that equate to? Again, there's a very trivial term for that, it's called support. Over time, you will have beginner questions. Will these beginner questions ever stop? No, there will always be beginners. In my personal opinion, there's no dumb questions, there's only dumb answers, or there's missing documentation. So if you have the same question repeatedly over and over, go to your documentation page and fix that one. Help beginners get started, gives them a good first-time impression. Oftentimes, those will turn into your most successful contributors. Are there any students here? Or any university people? Okay, a couple. Just a hint, there's something called Google Summer of Code where Google pays students to contribute to open source. Tell that your students. We've had several successful students contribute to Mahute. Most of them stuck around for several years. Some of them are still active. One of them is now mentoring another student. So this program actually works if you put the time into it. Where else do you want to look? Clearly, Stack Overflow and other fora. You can answer questions there. You can recruit new people, fetch them from where they are, drag them into whatever resources you provide for your project. As an aside, if this is not your project, contributing to open source doesn't only mean that you have to contribute code, it can also mean that you subscribe to the mailing list or go to the forum and answer user questions continuously. At Apache Mahute, we've handed out the committer bit as a kind of thank you to people who didn't contribute a single line of code, but who helped others get started and who took care of some of this support load and took that away from the core contributors who could then focus on coding. Speaking of helping others, what other contributions are out there? There are projects which are widely known and which have a user base that isn't technical and which have a user base which doesn't speak whatever the main language of the project is. Successful contributions can also be something like translating documentations. LibreOffice had a very famous translation project. When LibreOffice was founded as a project, they had a lot of German code comments. So they put out a challenge asking everyone in Germany and everyone speaking German to go and translate code comment lines, also counting that as a contribution. After all, it helps developers understand the code better. Now, I'm barely old enough to remember the time when we had Usenet, when mailing lists were hip and great, where people were communicating over IRC. It took me a while to understand that some people are uncomfortable with using these interfaces, and that using something like, for instance, Discuss can help beginners get started with a project. Okay, something else. Now you've got people using your project, and probably they are finding issues and they are telling you about them. But they are creating issues in your issue tracker, and they are creating more issues than you can fix. So suddenly we are at a topic, again, pretty standard for software engineering, which is called prioritization. There's two sides to that coin. First side is, there's just too many issues created. You can't fix all of them. So at some point, you will have to reach out for help, and what projects typically do is that people tell you patches welcome, pull requests welcome. On first sight, this sounds like pushing people away, but honestly, from my personal experience, this is just a means of telling you, hey, I don't have the bandwidth. If this is really what you need, please get involved and probably stick around longer. At Apache, we have a saying that those who do the work are the ones taking the decisions. Taken to the extreme, I am organizing meetups, or I used to organize meetups for quite some time. If people were coming up to me and telling me, hey, this starting time doesn't work for me, it's just too early, I would tell them, be the speaker next time, and you are the one setting the date and time. Not only did this take a lot of the anger out of the conversation, it also gave me a lot of speaker volunteers suddenly. Another side of the coin is you need to manage expectations. Don't promise features that you're unlikely to get done in the short term. Instead, invite others to help you contribute. It's something that I did for Apache Mahute a long time ago. The issue that we had was that people thought in order to become a committer, you would have to implement a new machine learning algorithm and get that into the project. So we got a lot of people volunteering, hey, I'm going to implement X, Y, Z. And we were like, oh no. What we really need is someone to write documentation, examples. We need someone to do code reviews. We needed someone to do whatever. So at some point, I sat down and wrote an email to the user list, a call to action email, where I was very explicit about what we needed. And suddenly people realized, oh, they don't need yet another implementation of an algorithm. Instead, they need X, Y, Z where I can get active. So this led to much more activity shortly thereafter. Another thing that you can do is to go to your issue tracker and mark issues as beginner issues. As a little story behind that, we once had a Hadoop meeting in Berlin where some of the core Hadoop people were there and some of the users of Hadoop were there. So we were doing a hands-up session of which topics are you interested in hacking on. It was like a hackathon thingy. The topics that won was very surprising to me. Most of the people attending wanted to be taken through the process of submitting a code change to the project. They wanted to be taken through fork the project, check it out, build it, make a change, create a patch from that, submit that patch to the project, and then watch how this is being integrated behind the scenes, like which CI jobs are being run over that, which checks are being run, what do I have to expect to be posted automatically, what kind of response time from committers do I have to expect, and when do I probably see this patch online in a release. For me, this was surprising because the whole process was very apparent to me because I was living in it. However, within this meeting, there were seasoned software developers who had no idea how this process would look like. Okay, so how does this look like in Mahute? We've got an issue tracker. Those issues that are beginner issues are being marked. Okay, next step. You've got your contributors as far as they are already contributing patches. What you now have to think about is a reward system. How do you keep them motivated to come back to your project? Sort of like gamifying? Is that what I'm talking about? So here's the patch. Oftentimes, it's something where the developer has been scratching their own itch. Once this is submitted, the clock starts ticking. There's only so much time that your contributor can spend on refining that patch. They are probably doing this during working hours, or they're doing it as a side project, but they don't have hours and weeks and months to spend on this, especially if typically they are having their head wrapped around a different topic. So they are context switching between what they have contributed to you and to what they are working on at daytime. Okay, you want to give feedback very early. How do you accomplish this? Either you're very fast with doing code review, or you have at least some automated checks in place already. If you go to Apache Hadoop and submit a patch, they've got code style checks, they've got checks for whether code coverage increased or whether you didn't submit a unit test with your patch, all those very easy syntactical stuff that's being checked automatically. So you can go back to refining what you've done without any human intervention at the project site. In addition to that, you also want to have clear rules on what constitutes an acceptable patch. And you want to have clear rules on which types of features you are looking for. Nothing puts people off as much as working hours, days, weeks, and months, refining a patch and making it lovely and shiny, and then being told that it's rejected because it doesn't match whatever is the vision of the project. That's very frustrating. Okay, how do you reward people? You can ship chocolate. When I wrote my first patch back in, I think 2008, it was for the Drools project. It was part of my day job. I submitted the patch and asked the maintainer, hey, is this even interesting? Should I talk to my manager whether I'm allowed to send it to you? He was like, oh yes, that's totally interesting. I'll give you, let me think, some iTunes vouchers. I was like, eh. I was already having Apache Mahute going, so I told him, hey, you've got a blog. I'll send you a little blog post. If you want to do me a favor, just put it online. I'll talk to my manager. So as soon as I knew that the thing was interesting, I went to the head of the R&D department, asked him, is it okay to submit that? And apparently it was okay. What was much more helpful afterwards was that Michael, the guy at the other end of the planet, he was actually sitting down in Australia, said thank you. What do I mean by saying thank you? He put my name on the issue tracker. He put my name in the commit comment. He put it in the release notes. So I could take these web results, go back to the manager of R&D and say, hey, this is where we are being mentioned. And so we got some publicity more or less for free. And this helped convince this person to support me and others in the company going forward, making further patches. So just saying thank you and doing this not just as a, hey, thanks for doing this, but thanks for doing this because such and such and such, can be very helpful and can be very motivating. Actually, thank you is like the cheapest reward that you have in your open source project. Thank you only goes so far. There is a risk that you may run into the problem of having people who contribute a lot, probably even after hours. At some point in time, well, at the beginning, they're usually very motivated, and they do a lot for your project. However, this incurs, there is an inherent risk that at some point they will feel like they've invested too much. So at some point, you will want to go out and find sponsorship for these people, either donations, say funneled through foundations, or you may want to find some VC funding, or you may want to find them a job where they can do whatever they are doing full time. Why is that on you? If you are very central to this project, you probably have links to many downstream users, and you probably have a very active social network. Newcomers and rookies in your project don't have that. So it does pay to watch out for these people and to help them find paid time in order to do what they love doing. As soon as you enter the business of doing what you love doing for money, you will enter the business of having multiple hats on your head. There are points in time where you want to make explicit which hat you are wearing. We had a keynote speaker at Berlin Buzzwords who was talking about the issues that Apache Hadoop had, like community issues, technical issues, etc. This person was working for a company, a consultancy company, which was selling an alternative file system for Hadoop. He was running this keynote with his corporate slides. However, he had prepared the content with just his community hat on his head. So it was totally from a position of being one of the Hadoop open source project contributors. However, the keynote wasn't well received until the very end. And both the keynote speaker and some of his colleagues were very confused about why this keynote hadn't been well received. So we talked to a couple of people, and what was irritating to people was to see the company logo on each and every slide in the bottom right corner, because that made everyone think like, oh my gosh, he's starting to bash Hadoop in order to sell us his product. No, he wasn't. He was talking about a brighter future for Apache Hadoop and what the project should do. This was his conclusion. But until we reached this conclusion, everyone was suspicious about what's coming up. After that, this person came up with a rule that he was wearing a hat that was showing his company logo. And if he was talking about the project only, he would go on stage, hat on his head, and remove the hat if he was really just talking about the open source project. For various political reasons, he doesn't do this right now because it was a red hat with, you get the idea. Okay, speaking of money, what do you need funding for? Hosting is easy today. These days, you've got GitHub. It's very cheap and easy. There's services like Travis CI, which are free. One thing you may want to make sure, SourceForge was free for a long time as well and was very popular. It's no longer. If you want your project to survive for decades to come, you at least want to think about what it would take to move your communication and your code and your changes, essentially all your paper trail, off the service that you're currently using to something else. This is also why it took so long for the Apache Software Foundation to embrace GitHub. What they had to first resolve was, how do we make sure that the history of our projects is preserved? How do we make sure that contributions actually come from the people that we think they are coming from? Also keep in mind that there are some companies which are handing out software licenses for free to free and open source developers, like for instance IntelliJ or the YourKit profilers. Also, there are ways to get free compute resources from well-known cloud providers. So that's the hard metal stuff. What else do you need funding for? You will need funding for the times that you work on the project. You will need time to configure your infrastructure. You will need time to do non-coding work like press work. Just a little advertisement. You can donate to the ASF. We've got very few paid people. Most of this goes to machines and infrastructure. Okay, next up, communication. How do you communicate your project? What you need to think about first is a clear vision statement. Short paragraph. What do you want to do? More importantly, what is it that you don't want to do? So that once you have people suggesting features, you've got a clear reason whether this belongs to the project or not. So you don't have like feature creep, or you don't have long flame wars about why this feature is relevant or not relevant. How do you want to communicate within your project? Typically, if you work on a co-located company, what you will have is a mass media where people communicate next to the coffee machine. If you go to popular open source projects, people will be in Sydney, people will be in Copenhagen, people will be in Berlin, people will be in, say, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, wherever. There's no coffee machine to accommodate for this. So you will probably want to have a central hub where you collect all your communications. And you probably will want to have one central hub where you take all your important decisions. Say CI is red. Do I want to have to check Slack, commits, mailing lists, discussion fora in order to figure out whether this issue has already been resolved? No, I want to go to one source. Makes it much easier. Do we want to use the central public hub for all issues? There are some personal issues that you don't want to discuss in public. If two people have like a personal disagreement, get them together in one room or at least in one video chat to resolve that. Typically, their turnaround time is much faster than if you go, say, for mails, etc. Other than resolving conflicts, what do you need communication channels for? You will need to motivate your people. You will need a channel to find consensus on which direction to move to, on whether to accept a patch or not. You will need a channel to get feedback on your project. Is it good what you're doing? What are people doing with your project? Where should you go next? You want to have channels where you can teach and learn. And you want to have channels where you can set goals and direction. Bandwidth-wise, if you have a face-to-face meeting like we are having today, that's awesome. Because if we are talking to each other, we can see our faces, we can hear the language, we can see what our hands are doing, and we can deduce whether what we say is irony, or whether we actually mean it that way, or whether it's sarcastic. So there's a lot of information that flows that is not words. However, it's fairly expensive to set up. You can ask the organizers for how much they pay for this venue, and you can ask each and every one of you how much it costs to travel here and to pay for the stay at the hotel, plus what it takes away in terms of coding time at work. Also, it's not particularly durable. You can't videotape each and every hallway conversations that you have. So it's something that only the 2 or 3 of you are taking back home and not sharing with everyone else. Okay, let's take a step further. We take video chat. Now we don't have to travel, but we still have to find a time where every one of us has time for that chat. Imagine people sitting in Sydney, San Francisco, and Berlin. Try finding a time where everyone is awake and not sleepy. Tricky. You can go ahead and make this more durable by videotaping it. Okay, imagine your project is 10 years old and you have to watch 10 years worth of video chatting. Doesn't sound like a fun experience. Let's take a little bit more bandwidth out of the loop and go for online group chat, text chats. Say IRC, say HipChat, say Slack, say whatever is the newest and coolest kit. It's again lower bandwidth. We don't hear each other speaking. We don't see each other, but at least it's still synchronous, so we get feedback very fast. If something was understood incorrectly, we can ask and we can get feedback. It's rather cheap to set up. You just need a tool and internet access. It's pretty durable. You can store it, you can search the logs. It's still not particularly structured, well structured, even though Slack is adding threads. And it's not particularly good in order to track project history because it's very fine level of detail. You can go for web fora. Now you've got a little bit more structure. Topics of this posts on the same topic are grouped. It's pretty durable, you can search it. Same is true essentially for mailing lists. You you can go one level higher and create an issue tracker that's fairly structured. Everything that belongs to one issue is tracked in one conversation, including patches, everything. It's still pretty fine-grained. Imagine that after 10 years, you have to reconstruct the history of a project just from Jira issues or just from GitHub issues. It's something that I am being faced with right now for Apache Mahute. The original creators of the project have been asked to write down in a very concise way the history of the project, because essentially the people have changed entirely. It's now being run by different people, but those who are now there want to know where we are coming from. Something that we encountered a couple weeks ago, we had a little green elephant in the very beginning as our logo and switched to a yellow one 2 or 3 years later. A couple of weeks ago, our new people found the green elephant and were like, what's this doing here? What's this logo about? We don't know what this is. And everyone who knew about the old logo and knew about the 5 t-shirts that were printed in Berlin and shipped out to the world, they pretty much had left the mailing list. So we are now left with the task of figuring out what are the milestones that this project went through. And this is something that you can't deduce just from issue tracker or mailing list. So at some point, you want to write up this history and these milestones either in a wiki, which is well structured somewhat, depends on your discipline, or you want to write it up on your web page. Just have a where do we come from, so that your project has a memory, and so that all technical decisions and non-technical decisions are part of that. Speaking of all those communication channels, what you want to make sure of is to have one and only one canonical place where you keep your current status. You want to provide this as a self-service, where you keep documentation, and where you track previous decisions. At Apache, this is typically and very old school mailing lists. There's a saying which goes, what didn't happen on the mailing list didn't happen. Whatever you choose as a channel doesn't matter, it just has to be one, and one that works for you. Speaking of being active in these projects for a long time, you want to think about mental health issues as well. You want to think about how to detect people who are taking up too much work. How many of you know about the licked cookie effect? Nobody? One, two, maybe? Okay, licked cookie effect. You've got an issue tracker, you've got issues in there. You want to find volunteers to fix these issues. You've probably encountered someone who's acting like the following. Oh, there's an issue. I'm going to do it. Silence. For days, for weeks, for months, nothing changes. Essentially, this is like little children going to the cookie bowl, licking the cookie. Nobody dares to touch this cookie again, especially if this is a high-profile contributor. Nobody is going to touch this issue. So you want to have some kind of process in place in order to avoid this. And trust me, don't rely on people letting go of these tickets. This won't happen. You will probably want to have a policy where everyone watches out for these issues and where people aren't shy to go up even to the founder of the project. Hey, are you really going to work on that? You haven't done anything for the past 2 weeks. Maybe someone else would like to take it up. There's people who are volunteering a lot. Why do they do that? It feels good. You're helping other people. But at some point, you will have added too much load in order to be productive and effective anymore. At Apache, there's an email which was posted a long time ago, which coined the term volunteeritis for that. I'm going to set up the mailing list for that. I'm going to write this little patch. I'm going to get into organizing this meetup for you. And at some point, nothing happens. So you want to think very clearly about what you volunteer for, because other people rely on you doing that. And you also want to watch your peers, whether what they volunteer for actually happens. Something that's really bad is having someone in your community where the whole understanding of everyone else is like, okay, he's volunteering again, but he's never doing anything, so don't trust him, don't rely on him. That's pretty bad. There's not only mental health, there's also physical health. If you don't believe me, you should watch a keynote from Berlin Buzzwords, I believe 2015 it was, where Eric Evans shared his story of how many surgery round trips he went through in order to get his hands and wrists back to a working state after spending hours and days and months trying to get his startup to fly. So it may look a little bit funny having this little cat here, but it's not quite so funny a topic. Now you've got your project on its way. It's growing, it's successful. You've got startups contributing full-time. What you end up with is a project where you have a gap between those contributing full-time and those who still want to get in the loop but don't have the time for that. So you will need to manage this kind of communication gap. You will need to figure out how to give those who don't have the time to read each and every issue and each and every content to give them like a digest of what's going on, so that they are still in the loop. Also, you probably want to think about how to detect someone who is, in absolute numbers, not contributing as much as everyone else, because everyone else is paid full time to work on the project, but who still puts in a sustainable effort in order to give them similar rewards. Why would you want to do that? First of all, these people probably are important as well, as they are also interested in your project, as they also put work into it. But also if you communicate that you're open, and you have someone who's on a sustainable pace, but on a very low level is contributing and doesn't get the rewards, they will become grumpy over time, and this will be very bad for your reputation. Speaking about reputation, at some point you will need to deal with poisonous people. What do I talk about when I say poisonous people? There are trolls out there whose sole fun and purpose is to create flame wars on your communication channel. They will drop a ball, everyone jumps on that ball, takes it apart, discusses, and fights each other. After weeks they are looking up, where's the troll? He's gone. What he had was a lot of fun watching you. There's also people draining energy and time from the project without actually contributing value. How do you deal with these people? There's talks by Colin Sussman and Brian Fitzpatrick. Their idea was to collect data on who is draining energy from the project. There, suddenly we are talking about not using public channels. We're talking about people issues. The idea here is to reach out to different community members, getting feedback if they've got the same impression, and then approaching this individual and banning them. First of all, talking to them, hey, you're doing something wrong, did you notice? Can you change? If they don't change or if they're resistant, don't be afraid to ban them from your project list. There's another talk, for those of you who are German-speaking, by Christian Köntop, which deals with dealing frame wars and breaking communications that broke down. He was talking about times when Usenet was still popular, talking about the German PHP Usenet group. What he realized leading this group is that it's very hard to punish people if there is no punishment system. You can always create a new account and come back to the project in order to make fun of it. However, what he set up was a system where a group of people agreed to not react emotionally to people who want to create flame wars. They would keep an FAQ document where they had standard answers for contagious topics, and every time someone wanted to draw the community into a flame war, they would link to this FAQ relevant to the question, put a little disclaimer, formulate it in a very neutral tone, and very quickly the discussion died down. They also had not just one person do that, but a network, so that when Christian was totally upset and couldn't answer, he could reach out to someone else and tell them, hey, can you take care of this conversation? And what we learned through the system was those people back then who were trolling the project actually were trying to get feedback, trying to be recognized. When they realized that those people posting these FAQ entries, those people taking care of these conversations were getting a lot of publicity, what these trolls often turned into were the most valuable contributors and most valuable defendants of that same system. So there are some people that you can actually turn into those. Okay, last but not least, you will have to deal with change management. You probably don't want to run this project for your whole lifetime. So you want to build handover into your project from the very start. At Apache Mahute, Grant Ingersoll, myself, and a couple others were very active from the very start. Grant Ingersoll decided to go emeritus a couple months ago because he didn't have the time anymore. It took a couple of weeks in order to get his name out of every system where he still was the single point of failure. You don't want to have that. What we established early on was so at Apache you've got the notion of a PMC chair, project management committee chair. What does he do? He doesn't have a lot of rights. All he does is essentially the only duty he has is to write up a report of, like a quarterly report of what the project had been doing, how the community is getting along, and sending that off to the Apache Foundation board. What we set up fairly early, probably a little late, was to rotate this position through PMC members on a yearly basis, so that everyone learns how to do this, so that everyone knows how to bring on a new committer, how to give commit karma to people, etc. So this already made it fairly smooth. Overall, having a safe exit journey means you need to document the hell out of your project, and you need to start very early with delegating tasks. Otherwise, you aren't going to survive, and you will have a very hard time and spend years and years when it finally comes to handing over stuff. And when you are in a position where you want to do your handover, you probably don't have years and years' time in order to go through this process. And with that, I'm open to questions from you.
You talked about not just investing time, but also things like going to conferences and setting up a booth at a conference, things which cost money. In my experience, that's something most open source volunteers don't want to invest. They have their time to spend, but they don't have money. So you either need a business model or you need some non-profit organization like Apache. Is this something you could recommend, or would you say it's better to do this from a business model, or how would a standard private person go about this? What's your take on this?
First of all, there's no one solution fits everything. It depends on what you want. If you want a project that's vendor neutral and that survives people moving away and that's set up to survive for long term, I would go for a non-profit. I'm coming from the Apache Software Foundation, so my personal recommendation is to go there. Your mileage may vary. If for your project you want to make a living out of it, you want to build a business on it, I would go for either VC funding or for organic growth of your business. I wouldn't necessarily go for a foundation. Like the way I would make that decision is how much control do you want? If you want total control because you've got a business on top, me personally, I wouldn't go to Apache because one of the central values is vendor neutrality. And one of the central ideas is that everyone can get into the project. Typically, this is not what you want if you build your business on top of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, thank you very much for the talk. I'm really interested about the flame war resolution. Do you have any other references to study how to act on those?
So there's only 2 references at the top of my head. So one of them is a video by Ben Collins Sussman and Brian Fitzpatrick, which is called Dealing with Poisonous People. And it was published at Google I/O. If you search on YouTube, you will find it. The other one is only in German, so I assume it won't help you.
Do you think Scala should get a trademark?
That's up to you to decide, sorry. I'm not a trademark lawyer. The only recommendation I can make is to make it a conscious decision. I'll still be here around here, so we can talk and chat. Thank you.